So you guys are here. We're going to be going through 1.4 and 1.5. 1.4 is adding real numbers, and real numbers are just, they include negatives basically. So we're going to specifically look at what happens when you have to add with negatives. And then 1.5 is subtracting real numbers, and that's subtracting with negatives. So I know a lot of people really struggle working with negative numbers, so that's why I'm doing this session on negatives. So I'm going to get my screen going, and you guys are welcome to interrupt me if you have questions through this session. So we've got 1.4 and 1.5, adding and subtracting with negatives. So I'm going to just start with adding. So we're going to look at adding numbers if we have the same sign. So we know how to add positives. You get a positive answer. Likewise, if you add two negatives together, you get a negative answer. So when you add numbers with the same sign, you just add the actual values of the numbers, and then your sign matches the sign of what you're adding together. So adding a positive plus a positive is another positive. A negative plus a negative is another negative. So I have two examples here, one of each. So the first example here on the left, I have a negative 12 plus negative 23. So this, since both of these values are negative, our answer is going to be negative. And so you're taking 12 plus 23 and you're adding those together, and then you're just going to have a negative in front because your answer will be negative. So you're going to do 12 plus 23, and that is, I can even just line it up if you want to go back old school. That's 35. So because both of these were negative, our answer is also going to be negative. So negative 12 plus negative 23, you're getting even more negative. You can think of these as you're having things in debt. You're in debt $12, and then you just spent another $23, so now you're in debt a total of $35. And then on the right, when you have two positives, well, your answer is going to be positive. Whoops. So I've got 25 plus 18. So 8 plus 5 is 13. I carry the 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to get 43. So you are welcome to use a calculator to do these, but what's important to know if you're using a calculator is to understand whether you're supposed to get a negative number or a positive number. Because if you don't enter it in your calculator correctly, you may end up with something with the wrong sign. So even if you use a calculator to do the actual addition, you want to be able to know, oh, I just added two negatives together, I need to have a negative answer. Or you want to know that if you just added two positives together, you should have a positive answer. So that's a way to check yourself and to make sure that you've put things in the calculator correctly. Now, adding numbers of different signs, that's where this is where people really start to get confused, especially then when we move on to subtracting. So if you are adding things with different signs, you're basically doing subtraction, because subtraction is the same thing as adding a negative. So if you have things with two different signs, one's positive, one's negative, you look at the numbers and ignore the sign. And then you do subtraction, the biggest minus the smallest. And then your answer has the same sign as the biggest number out of the two. So I have two examples here to demonstrate this. So on the left, I have negative 3 plus 9. So this is basically a subtraction problem of 9 minus 3, because 9 is bigger than 3. And then 9 is the positive number, or the bigger number. So, and because 9 is positive, our answer is going to be positive. So 9 is the bigger number, and it has this positive sign in front. So that means our answer will be positive. So what we are doing is basically 9 minus 3, and 9 minus 3 is 6. So we got a positive 6 when we have negative 3 plus 9. Now on the right, we have 6 plus negative 9. So 9 is bigger than 6. So 9's the bigger number, but it has a negative in front, so our answer is going to be negative in this case, because 9 has the negative sign. So 9 is bigger than 6, and then we have that negative sign, so that means our answer is negative. So you're going to still subtract, and we're going to do 9 minus 6, but your answer will be negative. So 9 minus 6 is 3, so we get a negative 3 for our answer there. So that's how you add things with different signs. So are there any questions so far? Okay. So now I'm going to move on to subtraction, and subtraction is usually the hardest part for people. So the key here, let me move get my highlighter going. Subtraction is the same as adding a negative. So anytime you see subtraction, you can rewrite that as adding a negative. Or anytime you see adding a negative, you can turn that into subtraction. The other key thing here is that when you subtract a negative, that's the same thing as adding a positive. And that is because you think of a negative as being the opposite. So if I have a negative 2, that's the opposite of positive 2. If I put another negative sign in front, I'm now taking the opposite again. So the opposite of a negative is now a positive. So if you're subtracting a negative, those two signs, the negative signs, essentially cancel and you're left with a positive. So it turns into adding. So I have 4 examples here with different combinations of signs. So you can see how everything works when you have subtraction. So first here I have a positive minus a positive. 9 minus 12. So here, subtraction is the same as adding a negative. So that's the same as 9 plus negative 12. So now I'm adding, I have a positive and a negative I'm adding together. And because 12 is bigger than 9, and 12 is negative, my answer will be negative. So I'm going to have a negative, and then you're really doing 12 minus 9. So 12 minus 9 is 3. So your answer here is negative 3. So I first have to turn the subtraction to adding a negative, and then I go back to the rules for adding negatives, and that's how I simplify and get my answer. Now I'm going to go to the top right. So the only difference here is now I have a negative minus a positive number. Negative 9 minus 12. So we're going to take subtraction, we're going to rewrite this as adding a negative. So that's negative 9 plus negative 12. So now I'm adding two things with the same sign. So I have a negative 9 plus negative 12. The rules for addition say that I'm going to have a negative because they're going to have the same sign answer. So I'm going to add 12 and 9, and then my answer will be negative. So 9 plus 12 is 21, so I get a negative 21 here. So I have the subtraction, I rewrite it as adding a negative, and then I follow my rules for adding. Bottom left here, I have a positive minus a negative. So 9 minus negative 12. So I'm turning my subtraction to adding a negative. So this is basically I'm 9 plus negative negative 12. So that's the two negatives. The opposite of a negative is a positive. So this is 9 plus 12. So if you have two negatives there, you can turn that into a positive. They cancel. 9 plus 12 is 21. So this gives us a positive 21. Now on the bottom right, I have a negative minus a negative. So I'm going to take my subtraction and turn it into adding a negative. So I'm negative 9 plus, turning into adding a negative, plus a negative, negative 12. And the two negatives there turn into addition. I already have an addition sign, so this is really negative 9 plus 12. So now I need to follow the rules of addition when I have the opposite sign. So I have a negative plus a positive, and 12 is bigger. So when I subtract these, my answer will be positive because 12 is positive. So this is really the same thing as 12 minus 9, which is 3. So you want to be very careful when you have these negatives. The key is if you're subtracting, it's probably easiest to change it to adding a negative, and then you follow the rules for adding when you have negatives involved. And if you notice that the positive minus the positive has the opposite sign of the negative minus the negative, because negatives are opposite of positives. And the positive minus the negative is the opposite sign of negative minus positive. They're like reversing each other. So the most common error I see is that people get the wrong sign as their answer. And so you want to be very careful that you're doing things in the right order so that you can get the correct sign for your answer. The general rule is if you're subtracting something bigger than what you started with, your answer will end up negative. So that's the general rule. So like the top row, 12 is bigger than 9, so I'm subtracting more than I have, so I'm going to get a negative. And then I have negative 9, I'm subtracting more, I'm already negative, so it's going to stay negative. Because when you go to negative, if you're thinking of a number line, you're moving to the left. So are there any questions on these 4 examples of subtracting when we have negatives involved? Okay, so I wanted to do a couple with the order of operations to show you how this works. So, order of operations, I have a video on this in the classroom. It is Please Excuse My Dear Aunt Sally, or PEMDAS, where the P stands for parentheses, E is exponents, multiplication and division are the M and the S, and those always go left to right. So that goes with whichever you see coming first. And then the A and the S are addition and subtraction, and those also go left to right. So those go in the order that you are reading it. So the top one here, the first example, is just addition and subtraction. So we need to go left to right here, regardless of which one comes first. So I'm going to highlight. So we have -3 minus -4. So we need to do that step first. So we're subtracting a negative that turns into a positive. So what I think is helpful is just turn that into a plus sign to help you remember that. So you have -3 plus 4. -3 plus 4 is the same as 4 minus 3. Our answer is going to be positive because the 4 is positive and that's bigger. So 4 minus 3 is 1. So that gives us 1. So we have 1 plus 1 minus 2 minus 5. So now we're still going left to right. So now I need to do 1 plus 1. So that's 2 minus 2 minus 5. So I'm going left to right. 2 minus 2 is 0. So I have 0 minus 5. 0 minus 5. If I'm 0 and then I'm subtracting, I'm going to the left, I'm getting more negative. This is the same as if I did 5 minus 0, and then my answer is negative because 5 is bigger than 0 and that has a minus sign in front of it. So 5 minus 0 is 5. Because my 5 has a negative sign, my answer has a negative sign. So this is -5 as your final answer. So you work left to right. Now let's take a look at the second example here. This is more complicated. This is involving parentheses. So when you're having parentheses, you work inside out. So you simplify the innermost grouping. So you think of these as grouping things together. So first we have curly braces, a left one on the 25 and then one at the very end. So that's the outside group. Within those, we have brackets, the square brackets. So that's our inside group. And so we need to do the inside group before we do the outside group. So that means I need to do, let me make sure I'm on my highlighter. I need to simplify 3 minus -1 first before I do anything else. So if you're subtracting a negative, that turns into addition. So I'm going to just write that as a plus sign. So that's 3 plus 1. So 3 plus 1 is 4. So I'm going to rewrite everything that I have. 15 is in a curly brace. The curly brace is just used so we don't get confused with our sets of parentheses. So that's 25 plus 2, and then a bracket, and then we had 3 plus 1, which is 4. Close my bracket, curly brace. So brackets are also just like parentheses. So now we're still working inside the curly braces. We need to work our way inside out. So inside the curly brace, I have 25 plus 2, and then the bracket. That 2 and then the bracket is multiplication. That's implied multiplication. If you have a number right next to something like a parenthesis or a bracket, we assume multiplication. So multiplication comes before addition. I need to multiply 2 times 4 before I do anything else. So I have my 15 minus curly brace 25, and then 2 times 4 is 8. So that's 25 plus 8. So I'm still working inside the curly braces. I need to simplify that as much as possible. So that means now I need to do the addition here. 25 plus 8. So 25 plus 8 is 33. And when I find that, I can remove the curly brackets there because I have a positive there, or I can just leave it. It's fine. But I'm gonna leave that off. Actually, it's probably easier if you leave it as maybe parentheses there. But 25 plus 8 is 33. So now I have 15 minus 33. So now I have to do this subtraction here. So we're subtracting, so we're adding a negative. So this is the same thing as 15 plus negative 33. So when you're adding and you have opposite signs, you are doing subtraction, but your sign is matching with whatever the bigger number is. So 33 is bigger than 15. So 33 is negative. My answer is going to be negative. So I'm really doing 33 minus 15, but getting a negative answer out. So 33 minus 15. So I know that 30 minus 15 is 15. I have 3 more. That's going to give me 18. So this is going to give me a negative 18 as my final answer. So this may seem like many more steps than you might normally show, but if you are not that comfortable with negatives, or you're still getting used to them, I strongly recommend you show more steps than you need to so that you can keep track of everything that is going on. And if it helps, you can write what you're doing, like the rule. So like here, between my 15 minus 33 and 15 plus negative 33, I can write that subtraction is adding a negative. And so there's a note of what you did. Subtraction equals adding a negative. So you can write a little note, and then I have 15 plus negative 33, and I did 33 minus 15, but it's negative. You can say neg, I just abbreviate negative as neg, because 33 is negative and larger than 15. So you can write little notes to yourself to help you remember the rules that you're doing in order to simplify with fractions. If you choose to use a calculator, you want to make sure that you're entering in exactly right so that you don't have too many negative signs. Because oftentimes when I see people using a calculator, is they've put too many negative signs, or they've missed one, or they've not put it in quite right, and that's usually where errors occur. So you want to be very careful if you're going to rely on a calculator. Otherwise, if you try to do everything on your head, at least to tell yourself whether you're going to get a negative or positive, that's more successful with the understanding and a way to check yourself to make sure you're doing things correctly. So are there any questions on these two examples of the order of operations dealing with negatives and addition and subtraction? Okay. Well, I don't see anybody typing anything or asking anything. So if you do have questions later on down the road, you can give me a call. You can email me. My email address is skajpust@grantham.edu. So go ahead and email me if you have questions later on. Hopefully this has cleared up any questions you had about negatives and adding and subtracting all of those. And thank you so much for joining me for this and watching this session. I have more sessions in our in the live session folder. I have the session from last Thursday on fractions. And so far I'm going to do our week 2 introduction on Wednesday at 2 p.m. I had to fit it in. I'm trying to fit it around like meetings and all that stuff. But I'm hoping that the following weekend I'll be able to do an evening one instead to give you guys a chance to have one in the evening for the introduction. And then I plan on having a session Friday, also at 2 p.m. on section 1.7. So I've got that sort of scheduled out. That is on the calendar. If you click on the live session link and scroll down, there's the Google Calendar, and so you should see those up there. So if you have questions, of course, you know how to contact me. And I thank you guys so much for attending. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your night. So